A break for freedom in a stolen plane and a rescue at sea. The U.S. Coast Guard picks up survivors from a Cuban plane, but what happens to them now? A CBS exclusive, missing documents in the Firestone tire investigation. Bush courts women voters, beginning with Oprah, and the battle over virtual violence as one city orders kids away from the games.
I think most people just don't really have any idea how bad these games are. I started.
This is the CBS Evening News with Dan Rather reporting from CBS News headquarters in New York.
Good evening. A U.S. Coast Guard helicopter took off on a mercy mission tonight in the southern Gulf of Mexico, where a flight to freedom went very wrong. The chopper is hooking up with a cargo ship that pulled at least 9 survivors, 1 badly injured and 1 body, from waters off western Cuba, after their apparently stolen single-engine plane crashed at sea today. We get the latest from CBS's Bobby Harley in Miami. Bobby?
Well, Dan, CBS News has learned from Cuban sources that a 36-year-old pilot named Angel Lenin, along with his wife and 2 children, stole the plane and then flew it to another airport to pick up more people before attempting to fly to Miami.
It was a plane like this one, an Antonov AN-2, a Russian-made propeller-driven biplane. Most often used as a crop duster, today the Cuban government says it was used by a hijacker. The plane left Pinar del Rio in the western part of Cuba about 8:30 this morning. At 8:44, the pilot tells Havana he's being hijacked and is low on fuel. 9 a.m., Cuba's radar loses the plane. 41 minutes later, Cuba says the plane has gone down. And within minutes, Florida Air National Guard F-15s begin searching. Soon after, they were joined by Coast Guard helicopters and cutters and U.S. Air Force tracking planes. But almost 4 hours later and 100 miles from the original search area, it was a Panamanian cargo ship, the Chios Dream, that happened upon the crash site, spotting 9 survivors and the body of another. Exactly what took place before they were found and what happens to them next remains unclear.
I can imagine that there'll be a lot of questions about what should be done about the people that are found alive. I think the most important thing now is just to worry about their care.
This is not the first time hijackers or defecting Cuban pilots have used one of these small planes to leave Cuba. At least 3 such flights landed safely in Miami.
One of the survivors was seriously injured and is being airlifted to Key West. As for the others, they're going to remain on the ship that saved them for now, as the Coast Guard and immigration officials decide whether they'll come here or be sent back to Cuba. Dan?
CBS's Bobby Harley in Miami. It's still not clear what will happen to the survivors of this plane crash at sea. Cuba says the plane was hijacked. Other sources outside of Cuba indicate it may have been stolen on the ground. What really happened will help determine what happens to the refugees rescued at sea. CBS's Wyatt Andrews explains.
The survivors will first be treated by American doctors, but their next visitor will come from the FBI. U.S. officials say they must sort the innocent passengers from the active hijackers and make choices about prosecution. Remember, steal a MiG from Cuba, as Orestes Lorenzo did 9 years ago, and you're a hero. Hijack an airplane, and you're a pirate.
There's a great interest in by the United States government in discouraging hijacking. People's lives are put at risk in such operations.
In the case of those who are involved in air piracy, it is much more likely that they would be prosecuted under U.S. law and not returned to Cuba.
But the next big question is, what happens to the 3 children who were on board? Just as in the case of Elian Gonzalez, INS officials must learn which relatives are alive, who wants the children, and where.
What's complicated about minors is that, of course, there might be family in Cuba, particularly parents, who would like them back. That was the complicating case in Elian Gonzalez, and that could be the complication here.
It matters that these survivors were found at sea, which by law automatically makes it tougher for a potential refugee to prove a case for political asylum. Those not prosecuted for this hijacking, in other words, will most likely return to Cuba. Wyatt Andrews, CBS News, Washington.
CBS's Cheryl Atkinson broke the story last night. Today, German-owned Continental General Tire Company announced the recall of 160,000 SUV tires, 16-inch ContiTrack AS tires, original equipment on the 1998 and 99 Lincoln Navigator. There are reports from Saudi Arabia that some of these tires there lost part of their treads. There are no reports of any deaths or serious injuries. That, of course, is not the case with Firestone tires. Cheryl has new information about that and the case of the missing documents.
Tonight, there's another significant jump in the number of deaths under investigation in the Firestone tire recall. 103 fatalities, more than 400 injuries, and the safety probe is far from over. CBS News has been told that both Ford and Firestone have failed to turn over key documents in the congressional investigation. Among the boxes of documents delivered to Capitol Hill last week, sources say Firestone included only a tiny fraction of the test data Congress requested, omitting the most critical reports, details on hundreds of unusual tread separations of Explorer tires. Firestone even videotaped the tests, according to the company's own records, but has failed to turn over the video. Another key missing document contains results of high-speed durability tire tests conducted when the Explorer was being developed. Firestone claimed Ford had it, but Ford has now submitted this affidavit from the specialist who conducted the testing, James Avoris. He claims the tires passed the test and the results were documented. However, he says, I am informed that those documents no longer exist at Ford due to the passage of time. A frustrated congressional source said, quote, they've eliminated the stuff that could be the most incriminating. Ford and Firestone are already under fire for keeping the tire problem quiet when it first surfaced overseas. Some in Congress now want criminal penalties for companies that fail to correct dangerous defects.
They make a cost-benefit analysis. It's cheaper to pay the damages than it is to correct the defect in the vehicle.
The fact that Congress is not getting key documents is leading some to believe they may never fully know the answer to the fundamental question. What did Ford and Firestone know, and when did they know it? Ford today said it complied with Congress. Firestone had no comment. Dan?
Cheryl Atkinson. On the CBS Market Watch, a top OPEC official said today he expects oil prices to fall, quote, very soon. If they don't, he said, OPEC will take action. Oil prices slid a bit from yesterday's 10-year highs. New York benchmark crude closed today at $36.50 a barrel. A rally in tech stocks since the NASDAQ soaring today. The Dow blue chips went the other way. As expected, the U.S. Senate today approved permanent, normal U.S. trade relations with China, clearing the way for Chinese membership in the World Trade Organization. This is a considerable victory for the Chinese government and its communist leadership. The vote in the U.S. Senate was 85-15. This bill now goes to President Clinton, who says he definitely will sign it into law. Up next here on the CBS Evening News, Democrats and Republicans battle for power in Congress. And later, a shortage of power in California, an energy emergency. It's 7 weeks now to Election Day, and it's starting to appear that control of the House and/or the Senate could be tipped this year one way or the other by a few key races. How close is it? CBS News Chief Washington Correspondent Bob Schieffer has a preview and overview.
Today's voting in Washington state to select a Democratic opponent for longtime Republican Senator Slate Gordon is a late reminder the presidency is not the only thing at stake this November. And Democrats are suddenly happy about it.
We began the 2000 election with little chance for a Democratic Senate. There is now an appreciable chance.
A long shot for sure, but Taraselli is the Democrats' top Senate strategist, and here's why he sees an outside chance his party could take back control of the Senate. Republicans now hold a 54-46 majority, but at least 6 Republican senators, Ashcroft of Missouri, Grahams of Minnesota, Roth of Delaware, Abraham of Michigan, Burns of Montana, maybe even Gorton, face tough re-election campaigns, compared to only one Democratic incumbent, Rob of Virginia. So control of the Senate could turn on who wins that New York brawl, Hillary Clinton or Rick Lassia. It may be even closer in the 435-seat House. The chief Republican strategist there believes his party can hold its slim 6-seat margin, but doesn't expect much more.
I just don't think you're going to see much change in the House more than 3 or 4 seats each way Because, like Democratic analysts, he predicts 90% of the incumbents will be reelected. But retirements have left 35 open seats, and 25 of those were held by Republicans. If Democrats win most of those, they'll take control of the House. Money to run TV commercials is driving most races, so much so that a Kentucky state representative trying to move up to Congress urged colleagues to speed up legislating and get to the important stuff.
I urge you to pass this bill. Let's get on with it. I have a fundraiser at 6 o'clock and I want to get out of here.
Republicans turn the moment into a commercial against her.
In any case, control of Congress is shaping up as a real cliffhanger and should make for an exciting election night. Dan.
Bob Schieffer on Capitol Hill. The presidential campaign is being overshadowed in many ways by the Olympics, but today Republican George Bush made another in his bids to close the gender gap with Vice President Gore when it comes to support from women. CBS's Bill Whitaker reports how and where Bush made the bid today.
If women voters won't come to the candidate,
the governor of Texas, George W.,
then the candidate must go to them. So George W. Bush went to the queen of daytime TV, Oprah Winfrey, to court her huge audience, 22 million, mostly women.
Tell us about a time when you needed forgiveness.
Right now.
Submitting to the kind of personal confessional he usually shuns.
I'm looking for specifics.
I know you are, but I'm running for president.
But with polls showing Vice President Gore attracting more women, Bush today reached out by opening up, talking of his relationship with God, his parents, his wife and twin daughters. It was a hit with wife Laura watching at a nearby restaurant. It's part of his aggressive new push to win back voters who've been drifting away, hitting issues like education and health care that women say matter most, the very issues that are at the core of Gore's appeal to women and that he hit hard again today in California.
I will make sure that your private medical records are always kept safe and secure.
The personable governor had closed the long-standing gender gap, but when Gore shifted the debate from personality to policy at his convention, that turned the tide, says Ellen Malcolm of the Democratic Women's Political Action Committee, Emily's List.
I think originally George W. Bush was sort of a blank slate and people had high hopes for who he was. But as they found out where he stood on the positions, and when they found out where the vice president stood on the positions, women moved towards Al Gore.
And polls indicate Bush will have a hard time winning them back.
I think the words that he has been saying, he's been saying just to mimic them, to get the women's vote. I don't feel like he's truly interested in women's rights.
Bush says Gore has a gender gap too. More men prefer Bush. But usually on Election Day, more women go to the polls. Bill Whitaker, CBS News, Chicago.
CBS Next. California's electricity shortage. The high-powered Silicon Valley is told to power down. Los Angeles transit officials met today with striking bus and train operators, but they agreed only to meet again tomorrow, hoping to resolve the four-day-old walkout. There were few signs of anger on the picket lines today and few signs of severe hardship, at least so far, for an estimated 400,000 Los Angeles area commuters. What is causing a big hardship in California is the latest heat wave in the San Francisco Bay Area and the growing shortage of electrical power. The end of the heat wave is in sight, but as CBS's John Blackstone reports from the streets of San Francisco, the power shortage isn't going away anytime soon. John, tell us about it.
Dan, in the midst of this heat wave, an energy emergency has been declared in California today. Individuals and businesses have been asked to cut their air conditioning and turn off their lights to save the state's power grid from overloading. In this latest heat wave, California's churning economy is sucking up almost every available kilowatt. In Silicon Valley, big electricity users like Intel were asked again today to keep their workers in the dark.
We reduce the lighting and then turn up the air conditioning.
It's all an effort to prevent a widespread blackout that could do huge damage to the high-tech industry throughout Silicon Valley. Intel cut its electricity consumption by about 5% today.
That may not seem like a lot, but when you think of over 1 million square feet of office and R&D facilities and so on that we have in this area, it represents a significant saving.
A savings that's appreciated at Silicon Valley Power, the local utility in this energy-hungry valley.
You can tell that the customers are really making a joint effort to reduce their load, and they've done a tremendous job this summer.
For the 30th time this summer, California's electrical grid has been pushed to a stage 1 emergency with reserves dangerously low.
California is in a precarious situation, unfortunately.
Energy analyst Mike Zenker says the demand for energy in California has grown at close to double the national rate, but no new power plants have been built in the state for a decade. So if the power grid was on the edge this summer, by next summer...
Right. Reliability and price levels are both going to be called into question next year, no question about that.
Already, just about every power plant in the West is straining to keep the lights on in California. Yesterday, the state was saved from rolling blackouts by electricity diverted from dams in Oregon and Arizona. The danger of power cuts seems to be over for today, but officials warn that the failure of a single power plant or transmission line could still bring the threat of blackouts. Dan?
John Blackstone in the sizzling city by the sea. California is suffering from heat and power troubles, but in Marseille, France, they had a storm today that all but washed that city into the Mediterranean. The skies cracked open, the rain fell so hard for so long it brought the city to a halt and left thousands without power in darkness tonight. Coming up on the CBS Evening News, the Bloods Type V for virtual, but the legal fight it caused is Type C for constitutional. The CBS Health Watch shows the national shortage of donated blood has grown so severe, hospitals in Los Angeles, Philadelphia, and Atlanta have been forced to cancel elective surgeries. The Red Cross says blood donations are actually up, but not nearly enough to meet the growing numbers of procedures that require blood and blood products. There's no shortage of blood in many of the violent video games so popular with young people, and the virtual bloodshed has triggered a real fight, a constitutional battle now being decided by an Indianapolis judge. As CBS's Cynthia Bowers reports, the issue is an Indianapolis city law intended to shield tender minds from brutal images.
It may not be Mortal Kombat, but the first shots are being fired in a real-life battle over virtual violence in video arcades.
I think most people just don't really have any idea how bad these games are. It's not about football or basketball. This is about gruesome murders.
Concerned that violent games like these lead to aggressive behavior, Indianapolis recently became the first city in the country to take aim at the multi-billion-dollar video game industry in an effort to restrict kids' access to some coin-operated games.
We do not ban these games. We simply say that if you're under the age of 18, you cannot play one of these games unless you're accompanied by a parent or guardian, just the same as you can't go to an R-rated movie.
Game makers have fired back with a lawsuit, saying protecting kids should be up to parents, not politicians.
This is a slippery slope. What's next? Violent movies like a Saving Private Ryan, perhaps a violent book or a violent comic book or violent opera? Where do you draw the line?
The issue for me is regulation. It's not censorship.
This mother says her eyes were opened when she and her young daughter came face to face with a violent game in what she thought was a family restaurant.
I'm appalled at what's being generated for children. You're being rewarded for killing. I mean, what does that say to a young mind?
And it is that parental backlash that may prove more of a long-term threat than any attempts at legislation.
The legitimacy of the industry has really been drawn into question, and for reasons that resonate with a lot of people. So those have to be addressed.
The one thing on which both sides agree is that there are no legal precedents when it comes to determining whether graphic video violence is protected free speech. In fact, even the judge hearing this case suggests this is a matter which will ultimately be decided by a court much higher than his. Cynthia Bowers, CBS News, Indianapolis.
We have an update for you tonight on genetically altered corn not approved for human consumption that may possibly have made it to some people's dinner tables. Kraft Foods and the FDA both now say they are preparing separate tests of the product in question. This follows a food safety group's conclusion that the suspect corn may indeed be in some Kraft Taco Bell shells sold in supermarkets, but so far as is known, not used at Taco Bell restaurants. We leave you this evening with the story of a man who built his future in America and wants to preserve the legacy of America's past. 72-year-old Ken Behring is donating $80 million to the Smithsonian Institution, the largest individual gift ever. The California-based home builder will pay for exhibits on the U.S. presidency and military history. Behring says he wants people to leave the exhibit saying, "I know now what my forefathers went through so that we can be free." And that's part of our world tonight. I'll be back later this evening with 60 Minutes too. He was the first pilot shot down in the Gulf War, and he was declared killed in action. But did he survive? Plus, Madonna, a candid conversation about music, middle age, and motherhood. 60 Minutes too, tonight at a special time, 10 o'clock, 9 Central Time here on CBS. For the CBS Evening News, Dan Rather reporting. See you again soon on 62.
For news 24 hours a day, CBS.com on the internet and on our interactive partner, America Online, at keyword CBS News.
Four-legged champions that live forever, the incredible story tomorrow. Experience CBS News.